Well, I greet you all in the name of Jesus. He's the reason that we're here and the reason that we're desiring to take his name to the world. He called us out that he might bring us in, and he called us out that we might help bring others in to the fold. I'd like to begin by referring to a few verses in Judges chapter 5. There was a frontline worker here, and there was a support team. And as the work was accomplished, there was a song written about the support team, listing out the members of the support team. This is during the time of the judges, and Israel had fallen back into sin again, and God raised up Deborah to judge Israel. And the enemies came up against Israel, and they needed to go out to battle. And Deborah and Barak went out to battle, and they had a mighty victory in that battle. And they came back, and Deborah wrote a song. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 14, where she's listing out her support team members and what they did to help or not to help. It says, out of Ephraim was there a root of them against Amalek. After thee, Benjamin, among thy people. Out of Machir came down governors, and out of Zebulun they that handle the pen of the writer. The princes of Issachar were with Deborah, even Issachar, and also Barak. He was sent on the foot of the valley. So here she's listing out. She says, Amalek was there, and their people from Benjamin came to the battle to help, and governors came down out of Machir and out of Zebulun, those that handled the pen of the writer. So people were fulfilling different roles. And then she goes on and says that for the divisions of Reuben, there were great thoughts of heart. Have you ever had great thoughts of heart? Boy, that sounds good. Something ought to be done. Boy, somebody ought to do something. Why abodest thou among the sheepfolds, to hear the bleating of the flocks? For the divisions of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Gilead abode beyond Jordan. Why did Dan remain in the ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. Zebulun and Naphtali were a people that jeoparded their lives unto the death in the high places of the field. There was a lot of people that worked together, and a lot of people were called. Not all came. Not all fulfilled their duty. There was a faithful worker on the front line, and there were faithful people that helped, is why a song of victory could be written. And God is in the same business today. He is able to enable the writing of more songs of victory. And as people are sent to the field, as God lays a vision on people's hearts, we want to be faithful support team members, sending churches, faithful in helping with the work and helping to fulfill the vision that God has called them to. When Joel contacted me and talked to both him and Aaron about this topic, they wanted me to tell our story about partnering with all nations. And they gave me a lot of freedom. They said I could tell the bad and the good, those things. And I noticed in our program that it's reworded a little bit. It says our role as a sending church. So I don't know if they got cold feet, but they are a little bit nervous here, what I'm going to say today. And it's been a journey of faith. Our story with All Nations began in 2014 when God began to lay a burden on the heart of a brother and sister from our congregation for the unreached people. Matthew and Sarah Morehart were serving in Haiti at that time and had been there for a number of years, maybe 10. And God began to lay this burden on their heart for people who have never heard the gospel. There's so many people who have heard and don't care, and their hearts were turning toward those who have never heard. And they began praying about that and seeking God on that and learning what they can about the unreached people. And began sharing that to some of their friends and praying with them, and shared it with the church, with our mission board of their vision. And this sounded like a really big job. Like, this is something that we don't know anything about and we have no experience in. All Nations was in their beginning stages. And as a church, we didn't feel like we can do this alone. We need some help. And so we encouraged Matthew and Sarah to partner with All Nations, and that we would try to work with them and help them. We didn't know what it meant to partner with All Nations, and we encouraged them to do that. Matthew looked at it and he was aware of their requirements. And Matthew's a man of vision, and he likes to move with vision. And it's a very valuable trait, character that Matthew has. And ABT requires years of training. And there was more urgency in Matthew's heart. I want to go. Years of training look long. But as Matthew and Sarah submitted themselves to that and talked with ABT and worked with them and went through the training that they required, there were some experiences in that were extremely valuable in preparation for the work that God has called them to. The time in linguistic training, and then their time in learning Hebrew. Their family was able to spend 9 months in Israel and experience life there. And so through that time in the process, was expanding their view of the world, expanding their knowledge base, and proved to be a real blessing for them. They have been back and forth to Colombia a couple different times. We went down and visited with Daryl and Rose Whitmer, and they were in Piedecuesta. A couple of us brothers went with Matthew and talked with them, and Matthew and Sarah were there, and for a short time in between some of their other training. What is it like working with ABT? Well, ABT was a young organization, and they knew what they wanted to do, what they wanted to accomplish, but they didn't know how to do it. They didn't have any experience. And the brothers that were leading were young and didn't have a lot of life's experience. And I don't know, it just seemed like there was kind of maybe a lot of things against them, a lot of problems that could happen here. Besides that, these young, inexperienced men had some new ideas and new ways of thinking that we hadn't really encountered before. So if you can imagine trying to work with an organization like that, and then they bring these big words that we hadn't heard before, this indigenous church planting, and we try to pronounce them and we butcher them and things, and so they had some problems, they had some things that they had to overcome. But then they encountered another problem. They invited us to work with them, and we knew less than they did and had less experience and less knowledge than what they did. And they encountered a group of people that's kind of slow to change. And skeptical of new ideas. And so we've had a lot of discussions and asked a lot of questions. And, you know, when they say things that, like, you know, we're going into the jungle and thinking of planting churches here, and don't think that it's going to look like a Mennonite church. What kind of church are you planting? And this, it's an indigenous church plant. It's not church planting like we've normally thought of church planting. And we don't want you to form a mission board. How else do you do missions? That's all that you do. You have a mission board. Our church has a mission board. So a lot of questions, a lot of new ideas to think about and consider. But as we think about this, you know, the territory that we were going into was brand new territory. We have no experience in translating scripture. As Anabaptist people, before All Nations was started, we have very little experience with translating scriptures, with going into jungles and taking the gospel there. Our experience has been in other areas of ministry. So here we are. God is calling us to a new area of ministry for his kingdom's work. And I'm sure that ABT encountered some more opposition than they did just from us, from some other people, more questions. And those questions are good in helping to think through how we are going to accomplish this task and do it well, and do it in a way that promotes the name of Jesus Christ. There was a young man in college. He actually graduated from Yale University. And for his term paper in his business degree, he outlined a business plan for a quick delivery system, package delivery system. And his professor laughed at him and told him it wouldn't work. His plan was kind of crazy. He graduated from Yale. He took his plan and he put it into action. And 10 years later, the Federal Express Delivery Company was worth $1 billion. So if God can take a young man with an idea, and that idea can be put into practice and make a successful company of this earth, do you think that the Holy Spirit is able to take young and old, inexperienced, weak men and women and build something for his kingdom? He's able. God is able. And God knows. So probably the biggest thing in our journey is learning that, well, we don't know, but learning that God does know. How many of you are here today involved in this work in some way and you have questions? State your question in your mind and then say, God knows. God knows. How many of you have fears? Doubts? God knows. God knows. And may that always bring us back to God. God knows. So it's a journey of faith, a journey of trust. Faith is believing that God can. And trust is believing that he did and he will again. It's a journey of faith and trust. God can. I know he can. I've seen him do it back here. I trust him fully, and he's going to do it up here again. And as we walk that journey of faith and expressing faith in God and experience God in that way, and our trust and our confidence in God begins to grow, we maybe don't look ahead as often with fear and worry as we do with anticipation of what God's going to do next. How is he going to answer this? I know he's going to. I know he's going to do something here. I know he has a plan for us. How's he going to answer that? So it's a journey of prayer. And that is one of the things that sticks out in my mind in our encounters with the brothers at All Nations, is that they're men of prayer. And if you don't partner with All Nations, and your work is in a different line, or you do something differently, if you learn that from them, to be men of prayer and take things to God, they're being faithful in their work. God knows our needs. God knows how to accomplish the task. Someone has wisely said that prayer is not so much so that we can move God, but so that God can move us. You know, often we fast and pray and we have something we want God to do. And I wonder sometimes if in our fasting and praying, if we wouldn't be more requesting more from God of, Lord, what would you have me to do? How can I help? Lord, move me. Move your people to accomplish your work. It's a journey of learning to know God in ways that we didn't know him before. You know, every experience that you have with God and every task that is accomplished, that you help with, that's bigger than you were, and you saw God's hand in it. Every valley that we go through, we learn to know God in ways that we didn't know him before. It's been a journey of learning, training, exposure, different things especially for the field members. And it's wise for us to stay connected with our field members in the training, the learning that they're doing. I had asked Matthew if he had any points that would be good to share today. And he said, well, he's interested in hearing what I have to say. And I said, well, you're part of the church, so it's up to you too. But he made this statement. He said, the person in training will be exposed to a lot of new ideas, methods, and learning. And these changes affect one's relationship with God, himself, his family, and his church. He said, oh, wait a minute. Is this where we want to go? Okay. Think back 10 years. Have you been on a journey of learning at all? Has anything changed in your life in the last 10 years of your experience and learning that has changed any way you think about God or about yourself or about the church? One of the differences is much of this learning, much of this training is done outside of our communities, outside of our setting, with other people and other believers in other places. May not subscribe to the same exact theology and practice that we do. And it's important for us to stay connected through these times. ABT has been willing to learn and receive wisdom from those who have been to the places they want to go. And as Anabaptist people, we haven't been there. We don't know. But there's other people in God's kingdom that have been there, and they have sought to learn from their experience and from their wisdom. And there is a humble and an appropriate way to do this. One of the missionaries from Ethnos 360 in Colombia, he made the statement something to the effect that he was surprised that us Anabaptist people would reach out to them, that we thought they knew anything. There is a humble way to reach out to others and to learn from them. The teaching and instructions and things that we receive from those that practice differently than we do, that think differently than we do, will affect us. I don't think there's any way around that. It will affect us and in some ways change us. It can change us for the better, because sometimes God uses other people to sharpen us and to help us understand areas where we're weak in. It is something that we want to be thoughtful about. Well, there's new ideas, there's new ways of doing things, and sometimes we get a little maybe discouraged in the way we've been doing things. Maybe we've been part of an organization or of a basic system of idea, and there's been discouraging things with it, and it hasn't all worked like we envisioned and like we thought it should. And so our minds begin to think there's got to be a way that works. And if there's a way that works, then it just happens, and there's few obstacles and few discouraging things. And so somebody's new idea and different way of doing it, this has to be it. It's we just haven't done it right. Well, there may be some better ways to do things, and there's some ways to do things that in the field that we're approaching here that are different than some of the ways that we've been involved in missions so far. But every idea is going to have obstacles. It's going to have discouragements, and there is not just one way that works. If there was, we wouldn't need God. There's obstacles in the path, there's challenges, there's conflict along the way. And may those obstacles and those conflicts direct us to the Lord for his help. We're interested in taking the gospel to the ends of the earth, to the all nations. And we care about how we do that. In going back into the jungle, and we think about how long can we be there? How long will we have? Will we have 2 weeks? Will we have permission for 2 months? Will we have permission for 2 years? You know, when we're used to transplanting churches, taking a group of families and planting a church over here, we're going to be there for the foreseeable future. When we go into non-restricted areas, we take maybe 2 or 3 families and seek to build a church of the community there, and that can be established and move on their own. In these restricted places, with security issues and profile issues, and 2 families being there is enough, and sometimes 3 is too much. Well, how are we going to stay connected? How are we going to work through this and remain faithful? And how can we teach all things in such a short time? What kind of churches are we going to plant? What kind of disciples are we going to establish? If you have answers to all of these questions and you have it figured out on your support team and in the areas of your ministry, I'd like to arrange a meeting with you after this session so that we can hear from you. A lot of questions that we wrestle with. Our ways of doing things as conservative Anabaptist people are not just cultural practices. There's kingdom concepts that we don't want to just leave behind and say they're unimportant and we don't need them. How are we going to convey the truth in its completeness, in its fullness? How do we start with a people that don't know? Where do we start? God knows. God knows. And our prayer should be that we don't know how much time we have with these people, but God, could you help us leave them with something that they can carry on with in our absence, that you can use to draw them to yourself. All Nations has some new ideas about how to send missionaries. Our church has been involved with mission work over the years. There's been different families have gone different places. Matthews have been in Haiti. Some of our other families have been in Haiti. A director from the IFM mission is part of our congregation. There's been interest in missions. All of our interaction has been with mission boards. We've sent people to Nicaragua under Olive Branch missions. There's been people with choice books. There's been others with international faith missions, with CAM. So our role as a sending church was to support them in the work that God has called them to and commission them to work with CAM and their organization and to support their organization and try to stay connected with them and encourage them as we could. And we didn't always encourage them as we should and stay connected as we should have. And to supply some funds for them. And ABT comes along and says, no, we don't want a mission board. Can't do missions without a mission board. So how's this going to work? You have each church is going to be the sending body to send their missionary and be responsible for them. And so we have the church at Cuba, and if a church in North Dakota and a church in Florida all have people working together on the field, how do we work together? Well, one church would have oversight of the church planting effort and work together with the churches. So you mean we would form a mission board kind of the three churches? No, we don't form a mission board. And it takes a long time to get some new thoughts settled in your mind and to understand the ideas and how they fit together. And we don't have that all together yet. One of the goals is that they see this as a very large necessity, a very high priority for the field team member to stay connected with their home fellowship. And that is important. It's highly important. And trying to help us figure out how we're going to stay connected, how we're going to stay involved, and walk with them in fulfilling the vision that God has given to them. It's good for us to remember that it's a vision that God has called our church member to. It isn't our vision. We want to walk with them, beside them, and help them to fulfill the vision that God has laid on their heart. And there was a veteran missionary that said this statement. I don't know what his name was. He said there is a big difference between churches that have missionaries and a church that sends missionaries. ABT is interested in churches sending missionaries. Not that, oh yeah, we have a missionary, they're over there, we pay little attention to them, we can't even quite remember what country they're in. But they want us to be churches that send missionaries, that stay connected, that are supporting them and are helping them. Because as we talked about the uncharted territories that we're going in, the differences in the approach to missions, we typically think of 3 or 4 or 5 families and having a nucleus there. Well, a nucleus is pretty small when there's one family. And presently, there's just one family from our church in Santa Catalina, Colombia, back in the jungle. Have we heard how they're getting out of the jungle yet, support team? You're trying to arrange flights for Tuesday. All right, Daryl, thank you. The airplanes down there have a few things to be desired. We've seen pictures of several that they've flown on that didn't look very operable after hitting some trees and things like that. The plane a week or so ago went down, caught fire and went down and killed the 4 people that were on it. And then they grounded the planes for a week. And Matthew and his wife and son and 5 daughters are back in Santa Catalina. And they have about a week's food supply left. I guess unless they want to eat cassave for the next month. What are the options for getting out? Well, they could take a hike. That takes about 7 days for the indigenous people, 19 miles on a boat ride and some other things. Is God able to provide a way for him to come back out? Yeah. God's using Daryl to help arrange some flights for him to come home. And God has provided a way for us to communicate just a little bit with them, texting through GPS. But you know what? God has built his church for a lot more years without WhatsApp than he has with it. Do you know that? When the Apostle Paul was sent out, there wasn't a GPS way to text. There wasn't WhatsApp. There wasn't Telegram. There wasn't a telephone. But somehow there was a connection between Paul and his home church. And as that Paul made that circle in his missionary journey and he came back home, and there was an excitement in the air, and the church came together to hear the work that God had done. If God is able to preserve the Apostle Paul and Barnabas and Silas and those that he sent out on those missionary journeys in those circuits, God is able to preserve our people that we send out. If you're a support team member and you're here today, you are an encouragement to the person that you're connected with that has a vision for the work. Matthew sent me a text a couple days ago and said it's encouraging that some people are going out for Explore. And I had sent back to him that our whole support team is here, which I thought he knew that, but he sent me a text at breakfast this morning. He said, wow, I didn't know the whole support team was there. That's great. And I would guess that we can't quite know really how great that is unless you're in the jungle or you're out on the field and your support team's here. Unless you pat us on the back because our whole support team's here. I probably should tell you it's the first time we've been here. We joined with ABT before they made it a requirement that somebody needs to be here each year. And so we're grandfathered in and we don't have to be. Well, and there was a time or two and Matthew and Sarah were home and they came out for Camp Week and Explore and none of us from church showed up. Well, we're busy. We got things going. We got a lot to do. I don't think we quite knew how it felt to them either for nobody to show up. So if you're a support team, you're part of that, you show up, do your part. You can't make it to everything, understand that, and they understand that. But do be active in the role that you're called to. Support team formation and function has been a journey for us. Our church has operated with a mission board. We've had that for years. Our mission board has been a 3-year term and brothers kind of cycle through. For a work like this, continuity is highly important. And it took ABT a little while and a little stubbornness on their part to get us to form a support team and think we needed something different. And I'm glad they were stubborn and they kept pressing us. They were kind about it. They were humble about it and kept pressing us into that. But we have 4 basic members on our support team: the team leader, prayer support, communications, and financial. And maybe I should just have them come up and tell you what they do. I don't think they're wanting to do that from the looks I got. It's a journey for us in figuring out job descriptions. But you know what? It's a journey for us learning how to go to the jungle. We haven't done this support team thing before, but what I'm seeing as I look at it, I say, why haven't we supported our missionaries like this before? Why hasn't somebody been appointed for communications to check up with them on their finances? Hey, communicate with the missionaries, send them a letter if you think about it. Well, when nobody's appointed to make sure that something gets done and helps people do it, everybody thinks that everybody else is doing it, and it ends up sometimes that nobody does. And so this is a takeaway from All Nations as well, and this new idea for us to do a better job in sending our missionaries. If you're a support team member and you aren't sure what you're supposed to do, number 1 is to pray. And as your support teams are formed, I would encourage you to do something small, manageable, that you can accomplish, rather than having these big, great ideas of things that could be done and nothing gets done. And for our support teams, it's good for us to remember that we are called to help our field member in fulfilling the vision that God has laid on their heart, to walk along beside them. And sometimes we think about the children in these places. where are they, how are they building their friendship? So what are their needs? How are they going to be supplied? What about the wife, the mother? Who's supporting her? Where's she finding that? And we tend to want to rescue the children. We want to rescue out of hardship. And, maybe a wife is discouraged and struggling. Does that mean the family comes home? Maybe, but not necessarily. Maybe the children are struggling a bit. Does that mean mom and dad are in the wrong place? Probably not. But if somehow we can create an atmosphere where there can be a freedom of sharing the struggles and the discouragements and the things, and to where we can walk alongside and support in that. We don't want our missionaries to be afraid to share any struggle, because every time there's a struggle, hey, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to fix this? It's time to come home for a visit. It's time to do this. It's time to do that. I just wanted you to care. I just wanted you to be aware. We're not discouraged. We're not ready to leave. But there is a conflict. There is a hardship. And so the more we can do to keep those communication lines open. And you know what? Your field team members know that there's discouragements and hardships at home too. And they have time to pray. And they'll pray for you. And if you're here today and you're one that has a vision, you're a field team member, remember that you're a representation of your congregation at home. You're an extension of the vision of your congregation. So do your part. Do what you can to support, to stand by your brothers and sisters at home, to stay connected, and to communicate that we need you. We value what you do for us. God knows how to do it. He's able. He's able to accomplish this work. And we're going to make some mistakes along the way. We're going to learn some things. We might learn what color a cloth to carry in our back pocket or on our head, or not to carry. We'll have experiences like that. That's okay. You serve a God that's bigger than your mistakes. God wants people to do something. And even when we're pressing forward with the right heart and the right vision, and we make a mistake, God is able to use that mistake for his own glory. So move forward in the name of Christ. And God will help us to be faithful workers in his kingdom.